Well, hi there, everyone. This is Clifford Bates, and we're doing welcome now to Rousseau's Social Contract. Today, we're spending out the last four chapters, chapters 15, 16, 17, and 18 of Book 3 of the Social Contract, which focused on the governments, right? The question of governments, the form of governments, and the form of governments. So now he's been addressing the dissolution of government, why things happen, why the states collapse, and the body politic. Now let's go to the question of the previous chapter. Is the continuation. Last, like I said, the previous chapter focused on the question of how sovereignty is maintained, which has two counter. It was 3 chapters long. Today's starting chapter 15 deals with the question of deputies or representatives, right? The question of representatives. What is the representative? As soon as the public cease service, as soon as public service cease to be in the main business of the citizens, and they prefer to serve with their pocketbooks rather than with their persons, the state is already close to its ruin. So the idea is this idea that if the citizens aren't actively engaged in every political life, um, this is that first moment that they would rather give instead of they'd rather give service, public service by their actions themselves and them and themselves doing public service, and rather pay others to do it. This is the beginning of ruin, he says. Right. So therefore, it is necessary. And that and actually this is a problem of large scale things too. This is the argument: is once the society grows larger, having in a small community, in a small relative community, the citizens can do all the you're going to need all the functions of government. The citizens will do it. But once you get large enough, you don't need everyone doing everything. So as you get larger, as the population grows larger and larger and larger, you have division of labor, right? There's going to be a division of labor that emerges to run the society in that sense. And what's going to happen is people doing public functions where everyone did something and had public function. Now, no, there's going to be a specialization of a public function, right? And this is what happens. This is why this is one argument why this happens. That this is why representative. In other words, first you can't have if it gets too big, you can't have everyone participate. Things won't work. And therefore you create the division of labor in order to make the smooth and effective operation of large to produce bigger mass more necessary things to produce. In other words, the division of labor allows us to, if everyone doing is the artisan doing it himself, well then you produce very less. But by specializing in division labor, the quantity of production increases dramatically. This is what Smith would talk about. Other people talk about. Rousseau is quite on this, right? This is his point. This is in fact, this is the big difference about the earlier chapter about productivity versus the, this is something Locke will talk about in his idea that once a difference between what is achieved by nature alone versus the massive improvement that human action does in cultivation. In other words, the means of food just lying around, but nature gives. Man can exponentially improve it. Rousseau wants to no. He ignores that. This is contra this. He seems to suggest that while there's some improvement, it's not as big what Locke says in his discussion in the second treatise. He'd rather revert to natural order, what is naturally possible. This is always reverting back to nature as the condition in that sense. And nature is not merely what the state of nature, and it does not mean the state of nature in the sense, which is pre-political man, a pre-social, pre-communicative man, okay, pre-rational man. Rather, what he's talking about is you know, what is what is the norm and what is the thing for that given people in that certain place, in that certain location, on its own terms. Okay, and doesn't always assume that human cultivation is going to increase this. This is what this is something we talked about that, and I think even Masters has pointed out in the notes. So the first point he gives here is that there's the problem here. That the assumption is there's kind of the tone of the thing is that, my God, he'd rather have everyone be a citizen, but that's not possible in larger. That's only possible in small states. So we get in other words, the tone of the book on one level leads us to believe that he's favoring small political orders, and therefore small political orders are best as Republican or Democratic. But at the same time, he seems that's unlikely. He said that was unlikely. Democracies are never going to really happen. It's going to be more likely that it's going to be aristocratic. A more better government is going to be aristocratic government, and aristocratic orders are always more are mid-sized, not between. They're not too small and they're not too large, right? So, so we have to always remember this point here, like this. Now, it is necessary to march. Is it necessary to march to battle? Then pay troops and stay home. Is it necessary to attend council? They name deputies and stay home. By dint of laziness and money, they finally have soldiers. By dint of laziness and money, they finally have soldiers to enslave their country and representatives of self. So this again, this is the tone is very negative. Pardon. It is involvement in commerce and the arts, avid interest in profits, softness and love of comforts that replace personal service by money. So it's commerce and art. It is the commerce and the arts that moves us from political life, of where we offer service, then we offer money. Okay, this is the idea. I mean, there is this kind of this. Remember, Montesquieu is for the commerce, the argument of commerce. Machiavelli looks as that. I mean, Rousseau here says that may go too far. That's a vice. One gives up part of his profit in order to increase it at leisure. So, so you give up part of my profit in order to get more profit with leisure, my leisure. Give money, and you will soon have chains. Okay, that's that. In other words, that once you, because what happens, you're not. In other words, in other words, instead of taking care of the public business, I prive to my private business of making money. And by turning to the private business, by giving the other people to deal with the money, this leads to the fact that I'm not taking care of the public business; they are. And what's going to happen is the problem is that what prevents them from, in other words, what prevents them if you aren't taking care of the public business, watching the government, checking you're a citizen, a sovereign, engaging in this, and you're not willing to this, then and you're not even willing to do the necessary act of overseeing the government to make sure the government is not overstepping its thing. Then what happens is that you can focus on profit making and your private interest. What happens is that there's chains going to be on you. Give money and you will soon have chains. The word finance is a slave word. This is very interesting. Finance is a slave word. This is Rousseau the radical. Finance. The word finance is a slave word. It is unknown in the city, and that's by the word city. He means the Greek world, in fact, or the political world. Now, this is again. This is the idea of commerce and trade, what finance. This is money making. Money making. The ancients always criticized money making as an unnatural art. This is why they have the story of the guy who wanted everything to do Midas, right? The Midas myth. Midas lusted. He wished that everything. He wanted more gold. He wished that everything he touched would turn to gold. So Dionysius heard this and angered at this thing, grant him his wish, and that everything he touched gold. His daughter became intimacy. He couldn't have intimacy. He couldn't have people who loved him. They were all afraid because they touched him. They turned to gold. Food, anything he touched, put this minute food touch water, he dies of starvation and alone. Right, that's the fate of. So he gave him what he wanted, and what left him. He died emaciated, starved. He starved to death, and he starved to death, literally. Right. This is the myth of Midas. Why is this? That's why finance is a slave word. It is a word of somebody who's. There's almost Nietzschean quality of this line, right? Finance is a slave word, slave morality. It is unknown in the city, the free men, aristocratic city, in that sense. In a truly free state, the citizens do everything with their hands and nothing with money. So therefore, everything is their own. This is the idea, and that with money. Far from paying to be exempted from their duties, they would pay to fulfill them personally. I am very far from commonly held ideas. I believe that corvées are less customary to freedom than taxes. In other words, he says that corvées are the conscriptions of people to go service. Right? Yeah, he says. What is that line? He said. He says. Far from commonly ideas, I believe corvées, which are forced. I force you some. You are forced to do some service for your country, for the public good, benefits in lieu of taxes. Right? Are less contrary to freedom than taxes. In other words, taxes. Why is taxes? Taxes are controversial to freedom. Why? Because you're paying money. You're giving them money instead of your service. This is this line that money is corrupting. Right? His whole point here is that money leads to corruption. Instead of doing, I give you money rather than doing it. Instead of helping you, I give you money. Instead of serving my country, I give you money. Okay, this is there's something slavish about that. He says something unfree about that. Okay, we have that example. Rousseau would not think it's a good thing that you. I mean, the story of the Orthodox Jews to New York, I think New York Airport, came up, and he anyone who came with an IDF going to Israel to fight, he was paying their trip to Israel. Right, that was a story that happened a couple of days ago. Rousseau would argue, well, why isn't he and his family going? Why isn't he going to fight? Well, Orthodox people can't. Okay, other people are doing it. Now he's willing to pay other people to do it, but he's not himself. So is he really a citizen? This is Rousseau. Would be Rousseau's critique of this in that sense. Rousseau's argument is if you're not willing to serve, give your body, give your life for it, then you're not really a free person. Right? If you'd rather let someone else do it, that is the beginning of chains and slavery. Right? This is his point here. This is why he says that this is less contrary to freedom than taxes. The better constituted the state, the more public affairs dominate private ones in the minds of the citizens. Now this is quite different. This is what this is the view of this. This is the Greek world. He is giving us here is Rousseau returning us to the ancient world. In other words, this is the ancient. This is the ideal city. This is the city. This is the ancient civitas. The better constituted. I was using the state here, right? Term state. The more public affairs dominate private ones in the minds of the citizens. So, in the citizens of those who are citizens, what should be in the minds of the citizens? What should be paying attention is the common benefit, the public affairs, the affairs that deal with that are shared amongst them. There is even less private business because since the sum of common happiness furnishes a larger portion of each individual's happiness, the individual has less to seek through private effort. In other words, because the public good is so good and beneficial, that that the private person really is the good that the private people are benefiting, the individual benefits from this is so good that he doesn't really have to do more privately in order to do. Yes, he might have to do some private things, but the amount of it is such that the things that he have to do, it doesn't have to do. In other words, he says that the individual has less to seek through, has less. That's not nothing. So Rousseau does not think that every need of the person is met by the public, but the most important ones are. The most necessary ones are, we could say, right? In other words, and the larger portions of each individual's happiness. The sum of common happiness furnishes the larger portion. So the things that of our lives, what the larger portions of that which are essential for our lives, our safety, security, our well-being, maybe the question of means of that, maybe okay. What about the means of okay? No, you have to do you, we can't deliver that. You might have to do that for that, right? So therefore, this is this idea. This is not a pure communism here, but it's the idea of that you are a citizen first and foremost. In a well-run city, everyone rushes to assemblies. Under a bad government, no one likes to take even a step to go to them because no one takes an interest in what is done there, because it is predictable that the general will won't predominate, and finally because domestic concerns absorb everything. The private concerns, people's private concerns will done. Your private concerns, in other words, a badly run citizen, that in other words, the majority of your needs have to be done by yourself. Everything, in other words, that he says what won't happen, that the general good, the general will won't predominate in this in public affairs, and because that powerful interest will, in other words, the benefit of everyone is not going to dominate. Only powerful interests. People then become cynical. They don't believe that. No, why are we going to waste? We know that these big powerful people are going to get everything anyways. Why bother going? It's I mean in the movie, the famous movie. Election, HBO movie 1999, I think 1999 movie, and maybe I forget what year that was. It was HBO, not HBO. It was MTV, I think, produced the movie, which had Reese Witherspoon as the young girl, and then the story of a civics teacher in a high school election of the class president, the school, the student council president, and he hated the Hillary Clinton, Karen, a Karen type, a young wannabe Karen, okay, Hillary Clinton, a hardworking, dedicated, Reese Witherspoon character is hilarious in that movie. Um, and then the star of the thing, the football play, that whole movie is a good analogy of this problem. And this and her the football player whose leg is broke, so he can't be the star anymore. But everyone likes him. He's a nice, dumb, affable, dumb guy, but charismatic. And everyone looks, and because of his sports prowess, everyone looks up to him. And the other story is the problem of his sister, his adopted sister, probably, who hates his brother and runs against out of envy. Now, there's a whole story. I'm not going to get into the story why he does it, but she is not. Her whole campaign against the election is the Reese Witherspoon character is, I'm the hard worker, I'm the da-da, and it's wrong that this rich boy, charismatic boy, comes to take my job, and she is. These guys, this is all crap, right? This is the nihilistic argument, right? Well, this is the danger. The nihilistic argument is more dangerous. Why? Because it makes us. In other words, the black. This is Rousseau's point. The black pill, the cynicism and that I'm not going to get involved in the public affairs because, oh, it's corrupt. It's corrupt. It's corrupt. I can't bother with going anymore. It's not worth doing because the powerful interests are going to just do it. In the badly regime, that's going to happen, and therefore, in the bad regime, the citizens all of a sudden do not, because they don't believe that they get blackpilled in the language, and what happens is they revert to taking care of their own business. Um, so in the well-run city, everyone rushes to the assemblies. Under a bad one, no one likes to even take a step to go to them. Because why? Because no one takes an interest in what is done there, because it's predictable, right? They're saying, and because the general won't predominate, and finally, because domestic concerns absorb everything. Good laws leads to making better ones, right? Bad ones bring about worse ones, right? It's metaphor. Good laws lead to better making a better ones. This is an assumption, but bad ones bring about worse ones. As soon as someone, as soon as someone says, "What do I care about these affairs of the state?" The state should be considered lost. When someone, this is a great line. As soon as someone says, "What do I care about the affairs of the common good, the common benefit, the public affairs?" The state should be considered lost. The waning of patriotism, the activity of private interest, the immenseness of states, conquest, abuse of government have led to the invention of using deputies or representatives of the people in the nation's assemblies. So this is, in other words, these are the reasons. Why do you have the rise of deputies or representatives in people assemblies? Well, the waning of patriotism. People don't want to do it. The point up there, right? Well, that's one reason. The activity of private interests, second thing. The immenseness of the state, that's the third. Conquests and the abuse of government. Notice the middle position is size. That's interesting. And that and the abuse of government and the waning of patriotism at the end seem to interconnect each other. Because remember, why do it, the waning of patriotism and why and private interest dominate is because they don't believe the public. This happens because of this dominates, right? Because of this. Now, conquests are more interesting. What does conquest have to do with whatever. It is, and I'll just go continue. It is what people in certain countries call the third estate. So wait a minute, the third estate, the third estate. It is what people in certain countries call the third estate. The third estate are these representatives, right? This deputies. Third estate is that? I thought the third estate was the people. No, the third estate are not the people. It's the representatives and deputies. That's interesting in that sense. And it is what people in certain countries call the third estate. Now I got to stop here for a second. I want to because now it is. I think there's something very strange here. Something is very strange here in terms of what he says here about the third estates. Um, it's very counter reality because the in the ancient regime or in the medieval, the first estate is the uh, uh, um, the king monarchy. I think. Hold on. Okay, I just had to check something. I was correcting myself. First estate is not the king. It's the first is the king is always there, but the estates are the representatives entities. The first aspect of things are the clergy, then the nobles, and then the burghers, the bourgeois, the yeoman freemen, the burghers. The burghers, or the bourgeoisie, or the burghers, burghers are city dwellers. The burghers are the basis of the city. That's the word. That's the root of the word for the city. Bourgeois, bourgeois, the bourgeois This is the people, the commercial classes, the burghers. In fact, in Germany, if you say burger, the word for bourgeoisie, it's Bürgerklies. I have to find my German word for that because it's an important word because that's civil society. This becomes civil society in Germany. If you have the bürgerliche Gesellschaft, civil society, right? In German. So therefore, this is a very important uh, change here. There's something's funny going on here because this is the bourgeois. Now, he's equating the deputy, government have led to the invention that these things, these abuses, led to the invention of using deputies and representatives. The real reason is size, I would suspect, but he's saying this because he's putting through he's using the ancient prejudice against commerce, against that, and he's giving us this idea of the civic man, of the citizen, the active citizen, and the danger of money and using money to buy stuff. This is like this again. This is This is an aristocratic attitude. It's not democratic attitude. This is aristocratic attitude, and therefore, so there's something aristocratic in Rousseau here. The ancient view of the citizen person, is looks at the laboring classes and looking at the money classes as contemptible. As this is the classical aristocratic bias, right? So, but the third estate that he talks about is the representatives. That's odd. Thus, okay, so in certain countries. So, what countries is this? Because it's not France. France, and most of Europe, the third estate is the bourgeoisie. So, is this an attack on the bourgeoisie? Thus, the private interest of the two orders is ranked first and second. The public interest is merely third. So, the this is the metaphor then. In other words, you see what he's doing here is he's trying to say that the private interests of two orders is ranked first and second. So therefore, that is the nobility and the church of the nobility first and second. But the third is not of the everyone. It's the common people. Yes, the common people. But it's the bourgeoisie, the common people, and the people like this. So therefore, sovereignty cannot be represented for the same reason it cannot be alienated. So wait a minute. Sovereignty can either be alienated, it can't be represented as well. It consists essentially in the general will, and the will cannot be represented. So that's a very interesting thing that the will itself is not represented. It is the constituted element of all the people's will. Either it is itself or it is something else. So it is either itself, the will, that is represented and thus cannot be represented, or something else. There is no middle ground. The deputies of the people, therefore, are not, nor can they be, its representatives. They are merely its agents. So that these individual actions, they cannot conclude anything definitely. Any law that people think, any law that the people in person has not ratified is null. It is not a law. The English people think it is free. It greatly deceives itself. It is free only during the election of the members of parliament. As soon as they are elected, it is a slave. It is nothing. So, whoa. In other words, the only time if the people are not actively engaging in its thing and acting as the legislature, so this is a very he's in this point he's kind of contradicting his Myrtles. He's embraced. Here we have moved to a different Rousseau. That there's a tone change from earlier book three, which was more aristocratic, and this is an aristocratic, but this is a more ancient. This is Rousseau turning into an ancient Roman. Um, and this idea of this is a kind of Roman Spartan ideal of this. And the English people aren't free because why? They don't. They're not. They only free when they hold their election for parliament. Because but once after the election they elected their parliament, then they're slaves. The chains have been done. Technically, they're not representatives. They are deputies are only agents. His argument is not real representatives. Given the use made of these brief moments of freedom, the people certainly deserve to lose it. So this is a very interesting point that if you only have it then you don't deserve it. This is a very powerful negative view. Rousseau's Judgment England compares the letters letters in letters writing to Montaigne of book 19. Rousseau's vigorous rejection of the concept of representation distinguishes political theory from modern constitutional doctrines. Hobbes's notion of the sovereign as representative of the body politic, Leviathan, Part 1, Chapter 16, Part 2, Chapter 18. Rousseau was aware that his principles were hard, if not impossible, to realize under modern conditions, and as the rest of the chapter makes clear. Hence, it should not be surprising that he proposes for Poland a system of deputies who are bound by their instructions, representatives, right? Federal system, right? The detail of this proposal, which is explicitly described as being deduced from the principles set forth in the social contract, give an example how Rousseau applies his political theory to political practice. So here, in other words, we have to understand this is him in his ideal position. This is the ideal reality. But the problem is the real world is all messy. Is imperfect. It's full of slaves. Thanks. The idea of representatives is modern. Again, this idea. This is his major point. That, in other words, that it is modern. The ancient world had no idea of representatives. The idea of representatives is modern. We get it from feudal government, that wicked and absurd government in which the human species is degraded and the name of man is dishonored. Okay, this is his attack. In other words, it's modern, but it's also, we get it from feudal government, which idea of this. In ancient republics and even in monarchies, the people never had representatives. The word itself was unknown. It is very noteworthy that in Rome, where the tributes were so sacred, it was never imagined that they could usurp the function of the people. And that in the midst of such a great multitude, they never tried to pass a single plebiscite on their authority alone. The plebiscites were done by the people's authority. They acted not to. They acted as no, they acted not instead of the people, but rather to help agents for the people. They were agents, not delegate. They didn't have the powers of the people. Yet the difficulties sometimes caused by the multitude can be judged by what happened in times of the Gracchi, when part of the citizen voted from the rooftops. Right. This is the problem. This idea of what happened to the Gracchi and how they killed the Gracchi. Right. When right and freedom are everything, inconvenience do not matter. Among this wise people, everything was correctly judged. It allowed its lictors to do what its tributes would not have dared to. So the lictors, they represent the people, officers, lictors were the people like this, and they would just attack, they'd come force. The tributes would not act. It was not worried that its lictors would want to represent it. The lictors were just agents carried out to enforce the law. Right? However, to explain how the tribute sometimes represented it, all that is needed is a conception of how how the government represents the sovereign. Right? This is Hobbes. This is that government represents the sovereign. Since the law is only the declaration of general will, it is clear that the people cannot be represented in the legislative power. So the legislative power, it has to be, in other words, this idea that the legislature cannot be the sovereign. The sovereign is the ultimate decider, but wait a minute, the sovereign is the lawmaker, right? It is that, but the lawmaker. So this is a contradiction here. This is a problem. Since the law is only the declaration of general will, so law is the declaration of the general will, it is clear that the people cannot be represented in the legislative power. But it can and should be in the executive power. So therefore, in other words, the people can be represented in the executive power, which is only force applied to the laws. So therefore, what is the executive power? Is the force applied to enact the laws, to carry out the laws. This shows that very few nations, on careful examination, would be found to have laws. In other words, this is a very critique radical point. That if laws have to be the emanation of the general will. Therefore, rather, what most countries' laws aren't laws; they're just kind of acts of private will being forced upon other people. This is the distinction of how things are versus how things should be, right? The, However that may be, it is certain that the tributes, having no part of the executive power, could never represent the Roman people under the rights of their office, but only by usurping those of the Senate. So therefore, again, they would have to usurp the role of the Senate. They could never represent the Roman people. Only the executive and the Senate could. Among the Greeks, everything the people had to do, they did it itself. It was constantly assembled at the public square and inhabited a mild climate. It wasn't greedy. Slaves did its work. Its most important business was its freedom. No one having the same advantages. How can the same rights be preserved? Your more severe climates increased your needs. Quote. This is the idea of enclosed countries to adopt luxuries and softness of the Orientals is to want to be given their chains. It is submitting to these even more necessary than they did. In other words, once in cold countries to adopt the luxury and softness of the Orientals is to submit to chains more than they did. The more your severe climate increases your needs, during 6 months of the year, it is impossible to stay outdoors in the public square. Your indistinct languages cannot be heard outdoors. you are more you are more concerned about your profits than your freedom. You fear slavery far less than poverty. So again, this is the idea of the northern people. This is a very critique of this in that sense. What? Freedom can only be maintained with the support of servitude? What? Freedom can only be maintained with the support of servitude? Question. Perhaps. The two extremes meet. So in other words, freedom and servitude. In other words, they can only be maintained with the support of servitude. In other words, and that's the idea why the citizens are free and the slaves do all the work. Everything that is everything that is not in nature has its problems. So everything that is not in nature has its problems. Everything that is not nature has its problems. And civil society, more than all the rest. So therefore, in other words, everything that is not in nature has its problems. And civil society has more than all the rest of the other things that are not in nature. There are some unfortunate situations when one cannot preserve one's freedom except at the expense of others. And when the citizens can only be perfectly free if the slave is completely enslaved. So therefore, in other words, there are some unfortunate situations where one cannot preserve someone's freedom without the expense of others. And that when the citizen can be perfectly free if the slave is completely enslaved. Such was the situation. Such was Sparta's situation. As for you, modern peoples, you have no slaves, but you are slaves. You pay for their freedom with your own. You boast of what uh, uh, you boast of that preference in vain. I find it more cowardly than humane. So therefore, this is the irony about this. This is that modern equality. This is the modern equality does not mean equality. It means universal servitude. That the free person is free because he accepts the reality that his cost of freedom may mean that others must be slaves to ensure it. That are some unfortunate situations where one cannot preserve one's own freedom except at the expense of others, and that when the citizen can only be perfectly free if the slave is completely enslaved. That was Sparta, right? Modern people have no slaves but are slaves, and you pay for their freedom with your own. So who's their freedom? The rulers, the representatives. You boast of that preference and then those who serve you, those who carry out. I do not mean by all this that it is necessary to have slaves, nor that the right of slavery is legitimate, since I approve the opposite. I only state the reason why the modern peoples who believe they are free have representatives, and why the ancient peoples did not have them. So this whole argument is not about slavery, but rather about the question of why the ancients didn't have representatives, and the moderns believe why the moderns have representatives. However, this may be, however this may be, the instance that people chooses representatives, it is no longer free. It no longer exists. Remember that why men are born free and everywhere they're in chains? Well, the second you have representatives, you're oops. This is why. Okay, this is the answer to the question of the book. However it may be, the instant that people chooses representatives, it is no longer free. It no longer exists. All things considered, I do not see it is henceforth possible for the sovereign to preserve the exercise of its rights among us unless the city is very small. But if it is very small, will it be subjugated? No, I will show that later, quote unquote. And that is like, that is, this is what I thought of doing in the sequel of this work when in dealing with the foreign relations. I would have discussed confederations. This subject is altogether new, and its principle has not yet been established. So the idea of federation, this is the idea. I'm going to read the note in 106. I think this is a very important note. Since this note implies that the existing text of Book 3 was drafted before Rousseau abandoned the projected political institution, right? The book that this is going to be. It could be taken as evidence that the missing half of Geneva manuscript was detached and used with only minor changes as the final edition. Although some might be tempted to see Federalist Papers as the fulfillment of Rousseau's project, Hamilton and Madison follows Montesquieu, following commercial republic based on the separation of powers and indirect representative legislatures. For a sketch of Rousseau's likely approach to confederation, see it's the edition of Rousseau's writing, Volume 1, pages 95 to 102, in the text there cited. It is possible that a manuscript concerning Rousseau's conception of confederation was destroyed during the French Revolution, Volume 2, page 135 and 36. Rousseau's reticence to publish his ideas on this topic may have been based on fears expressed in his judgment on the project of the perpetual peace, right? A little SAS, a little piece of the judgment on the prospect of perpetual peace, having shown that the Abbé St. Pierre's projected European confederation combined individual profit and the common good. Rousseau concludes, let us admire such a beautiful plan, but let us console ourselves not to see it executed, for that could not be done except by means that are violent and dangerous for humanity. One does not see federative leagues established in any other way except by revolutions. And on this principle, who would dare say if this European League is so desired or feared? Right. Again, this is from Piod 3, the letter on perpetual, judgment on the project of peace perpetual. Piod's third volume 3. On this, this is. I read that note there for the purposes of this. So let's go back up here. How this was with snow. I'll show it later. How it is possible to combine external power of a great people with the ease and regulations and good orders of a small state. This is not done. This is something that's later book. Okay. Chapter 16. That the instruction of the government is not a contract. Once the legislative power has been well established, the problem is to establish the executive power in the same way. For the latter, which only operates by means of particular acts, is essentially different from the former and hence is naturally separated from it. If it were possible for the sovereign, considered as such, to have executive power, right and fact would be completely confounded, that one would no longer know what is law and what isn't. And the body politic, thereby denatured, would soon fall prey to violent action which it was instituted. So therefore, in other words, the body politic, thereby denatured, right? It was again, if it was possible for the sovereign to consider as such, as in other words, this entity, to have the executive power, right in fact would be so completely confounded that one could no longer what the law is and what isn't, and the body politic denatured, and would fall prey to the violence against which it was instituted. Stop it, right? Again, this is the idea that private act, private will would be, every private will being acting as this, war of all against all, right? The argument was. Since the citizen are all equal by the social contract, what everyone ought to do can be prescribed by everyone, whereas no one has the right to require another to do what he himself does not do. So no one, in other words, we collectively all can prescribe to us all what we should do, but no one person has the right to require another to do what he himself does not do. Now, it is precisely this right, indispensable for giving life and motion to the body politic, that the sovereign gives to the prince by instituting the government. So remember, the prince, the body, In other words, it gives life. That it is the action. The executive is the action. It is the active agent that does stuff. It carries out. So now that's why you give the prince. You create the government. In other words, it is precisely this right, dispensable to giving life and motion to the body politic, that the sovereign gives to the prince. The prince will be the agent exercising government by instituting government. Some have claimed that this act of establishment was a contract between the people and its leaders. It chooses Hobbes, right? This could be presented. A contract by which the two parties stipulated the conditions under which one assumed the obligation to command and the other to obey. It will be agreed, I'm sure, that this is indeed a strange way to make a contract. But let us see let us see whether this opinion is tenable. So this is this. I mean, and I think this is a direct criticism of Hobbes. I would argue, or understand, and I say of Hobbes, what Hobbes is doing, but how Hobbes has been read. And I think that's why it's not. He doesn't mention Hobbes. So maybe it's aimed more at not necessarily Hobbes himself, but how some people have read Hobbes. Right. First, the supreme power itself, the supreme authority, cannot be modified any more than it can be alienated. So sovereignty, supreme authority is sovereignty, cannot be modified, changed, any more than it can be alienated, right? To limit it is to destroy it. It is absurd and contradictory for the sovereign to choose a superior. To obligate itself to obey a master is to return one. In other words, to obligate oneself to obey a master is to return to one's full freedom. In other words, it chooses someone like this, and therefore nullifies the agreement that everyone held to do it. That it returns to one's full. It return to one's full freedom, right? It breaches the contract. Furthermore, that's a weird line. This line here is to, in other words, it's absurd and contradictory for the sovereign to choose that to obligate oneself to obey a master is to return to one false freedom. Right? This is right. Doing to obligate this higher thing. This would only, which does this, is to return us to the state of nature where we are all perfectly free. Because you don't have to. There's no just. Furthermore, it is evident that this contract between the people and specific persons would be a particular act. So therefore, this is the sovereignty cannot be limited in any way. It's a particular act, not a general act. It's between the people, and this would be a particular act, from which it follows that this contract could not be a law or an act of sovereignty, and that consequently it would be illegitimate. So therefore, because it's not law, it'd be this. It's a particular thing. It's not law in the sense. It can be seen in the relation to each other. The contracting parties would be under the law of nature alone. So therefore, in this situation, it would also be seen in the relation that to each other, the contracting parties would be under the laws of nature alone, and without any guarantee of their reciprocal engagement, which is contrary in all ways to the civil state. So in other words, in such contracts, it can also be seen that in relation to such contracting parties would be under the laws of nature alone, without any guarantee of reciprocal engagement. No judges, no judgment, no enforcement, no judge. Which is contrary to the civil state, since the one who has the force available is always master of the outcome. It would be as sensible to give the name contract. It would be sensible to give the name contract to the act of a man who says to another, "I will give you all my goods on condition that you will give back whatever you please." That's not. Otherwise, in that situation, is the condition is that in that world, there's no reciprocal. I give you this, but then you give me back as what you please. It's arbitrary. That's why it's absurd. He gives this absurd situation, since it would be the one who has force available will always be master of the outcome, right? It would be sensible to give. Would it be sensible to give the name of contract to an act, to which one says to another, "I give you all my goods on the condition that you will give me back what you want"? No, that's not. In other words, there has to be a contract. Has to be, you give me this for this, and if you don't do this, then there's recourse to an outside judge to enforce it, right? Um, this is what I mean. This is civil state. This is the thing. In the state of nature, there's no enforcement, so therefore, there's no guarantee of this. So so therefore, if I don't want to do it, there is only one contract in the state, and that is of association, and that one only excludes all others. It is impossible to imagine any public contract that was not a violation of the first one. So this is a weird thing. This is why the original contract is the only contract. Other contracts, and they may call them contracts, but they're not the same thing. So this is a very interesting problem because, well, wait a minute. So that you only have this one contract, and anything below that is either a what? Negation of that previous contract, or in other words, not really a contract, but something else. So there is only one contract in the state. That is the association, creation of the body politic. And that one excludes all the other ones. It is impossible to imagine any public contract that is not a violation, creation of association, of authority that binds people together, is not a violation of that. That anything that comes from here can establish something here, but this cannot be done by the same way, that in other words, the same set of authority. This is why contract cannot be the basis by this. There's no contract of government. This is merely an act of the will of the sovereign. The creation of it. This is not a contract in the sense that the body politic makes a contract to form itself. The only contract that is formed by the creation of the wills is the creation of the sovereign, the body social. So let's now turn to chapter 17, the penultimate chapter, on the institution of government. In what terms, therefore, must the act by which the government is instituted be conceived? I shall begin by noticing that this act is complex, or composed of two others, namely the establishment of the laws and the execution of the law. So two things. In other words, the institution of government is what? The establishment of the law and the execution of the law. Two things. The constitution of government is a complex act composed of two others, namely the establishment of law and the execution of laws. By the first, the sovereign enacts that there will be a government body established under specific form. And it is clear that this act is a law. So, in other words, the first sovereign enacts that there will be a government body established under a specific form. And it is clear that this act is a law. The second, the people appoints the leaders who will be put in charge of the established government. Now, since this nomination is a particular act, it is not a second law, but solely consequence of the first and the governmental function. The difficulty lies in understanding how there can be an act of government before the government exists, and how the people, which is only sovereign or subject, can become prince or magistrate in certain circumstances. Here again is revealed one of those amazing properties of a body politic, by which it reconciles apparently contradiction operations. Sorry, in other words, wait a minute, how can this thing do something before there is a body that does? In other words, he says, how can there be a government? In other words, how can an act of government before the government exists? And how a people by which only sovereign, or which is only subject or sovereign, can be prince or magistrate in certain circumstances, right? It says, here, this is how this thing operates, right? It reconciles. This is one of these amazing things of the body politic and politics, that how it reconciles apparent contradictions and operations. For it is this case, the operation is accomplished by a sudden con, conversion of sovereignty into democracy, so that without any noticeable change, the soul, and solely by a new relation of all to all, the citizens, having become magistrates, pass from general to particular acts, and from the law to its execution. This change is a relation no. This change of relation is no speculative subtlety without practical examples, for it occurs daily in the English Parliament, when the lower house, on certain occasions, turns itself into a committee of the whole to discuss business better, and in so doing, becomes a simple commission rather than the sovereign court of the preceding instant. If then it then reports to itself, as the House of Commons, on that on what it had just settled as the committee of the whole, and it deliberates once again under one title over what it has already decided under another. Right? This is this example. This is a perfect the idea of the committee of the whole Parliament, the House of Commons. The particular advantage of democratic government is that it can be established in reality by a simple act of the general will. That this provisional government remains in office, if such is the form adopted, or establishes in the name of the sovereign the government prescribed by law, and thus everything is according to rule. So in other words, it can either, in other words, the sovereign acts, it acts universally. This is democratic act. Its will is operated as a general will. Now it can do two things. It can either then create, this body can create, as the sovereign will, create a government body that will exercise its governance, creates representatives and structures like this, like that, he says, and then it will exercise for it, and therefore, or it will constantly stay in business. In other words, after this provincial government remains in office, if it is such a, if such is the form adopted, or it establishes in the name of the sovereign the government prescribed by law, right? And thus everything is according to the rule. It is not possible to institute the government in any other legitimate way without renouncing the principles established above. So, in other words, you can only do this through this idea, that the creation of this entity, that this is very complex structure of here. And last but not least, the last chapter, 18, the way to prevent usurpations of government. From these clarification, it follows in the confirmation of chapter 16 what the acts that the acts that institute the government is not a contract but a law. So it's not a contract. Government is created by a law, an act of the sovereign. That the trustees of the executive power are not the masters of the people, but its officers. That the people can establish and dispose of them when it pleases. So one. So these are the things that has been followed, right? This from the logic of these things is right straightforward, right? That the acts of instituted government is not a contract by law. One. That the trustees of the executive power are not masters of the people, but its officers. That this is the that the people can establish and dispose of them as they please. That there are no questions of contracting, but rather obeying, and that in assuming the functions imposed on them by the state, they merely fulfill their duties as citizens without in any way having the right to argue over the conditions, because they can't renegotiate. They can't renegotiate. In other words, That this is that thing, and that in assuming the functions imposed on them by the state, they are merely fulfilling their duties as citizens without having the right to argue over the conditions and negotiate. So those are the five. In other words, these things, five things that are happening. Therefore, when it happens that the people institute a hereditary government, whether it is a monarchy within one family or an aristocracy within a class of citizens, this is not an engagement it undertakes. It is a provisional form it gives to the administration until it wishes to organize things differently. Now, this is 108. In other words, it's always provisional, the will of this, the sovereign will. In other words, this is the phrase, and the two propositions can never be admitted at the regular assembly. So this is 108, right? Um, the phrase, and the two propositions can never be omitted at regular assemblies at the end of this chapter, page 107, right? Are key passages cited by the Procureur General in Geneva as grounds for condemning the social contract. So this is one of the things that this thing here, that this with the people. In other words, in other words, he's saying that what, that the sovereign can change his mind. There's no permanency here. The sovereignty, it's only what he says, that if I create a hereditary monarchy and aristocracy, this is only provisional. The sovereign can change his mind. If the sovereign says, I don't want a monarchy anymore, it's not a contract, it's not binding. It is merely an act of the thing, and the government can act, the general will can change his mind. It is true that these changes are always dangerous, and that established governments must never be touched until it becomes incompatible with the public good. So therefore, yes, in other words, it is true that these things are dangerous, and that the established government should not be touched until it becomes incompatible with public good. But this circumspection is a maximum of politics, and not a right of rule of right. In other words, this is prudent. This is about prudence. So this is circumspection, prudence, judgment, and tied of the question of exercising politics. It's not a rule of right. The rule of right is the sovereign can do what it wants. Okay. There's no constraint on the sovereign except itself. And the state is no more compelled to leave civil authority to its leaders than military authority to its generals. In other words, the state, in other words, civil authority, in other words, the sovereign is not compelled. The state is not compelled to leave civil authority to its leaders. If it changes that, if the sovereign says no, we're changing things around, or the sovereign says no, generals are wrong. Military authority to his generals is accepted. It is also true that in such cases, it is impossible to be too careful about observing all the requisite formalities in order to distinguish a regular, legitimate act from a seditious tumult, and the will of the entire people from a clamor of one faction. In other words, this is the problem. We have this problem. This is the problem he wants to point to. In cases, it is impossible to be too careful about this concerning observing these formulas. To distinguish something regular, a regular legitimate act from a tumult, or to distinguish the will of the entire people from the clamor, the loud shouting of one faction. It is above all. It is above all in these dangerous cases that the demands must not be conceded, except insofar as they cannot be denied by the full rigor of the law. And it is also from this obligation that The prince derives a greater advantage of preserving his power in spite of the people, without it being possible to say that he has usurped it. So this is this idea. That, in other words, this you have to. In other words, to ensure the public safety, you need to give the prince enough power, the executive power, enough power to do it. Now the problem is, well, what happens when he? This is why it's hard to cross that line. Where's the line between him using the power against the people? Because the people are not doing something. In other words, it's not the whole people; it's just a fraction of people who's committing tumult and like this. Again, 109. I'll read this. This is almost done here. 109. This is a nice little thing. Rousseau uses an old legal terms, le cas odex. As Bouvion points out, it is the case in which the extreme of the claimed right appears to be dangerous. In other words, you have a right, extreme right, but it's dangerous. Then one invokes the maxim of Roman law. Odia res resentia forma apiclendi. Sorry, my Latin is. I can read it, I can't say it. My spoken Latin is. My pronunciation, I'm got pronunciation. That's my childhood defect, still comes. I.e., harmful, the translation of the famous maxim is harmful rights must be limited as much as possible, and on the contrary, advantageous rights given all possible latitude. So therefore, difficult things odious things needs to be regulated, and favorable things must be just given expanded rights. So that's a very important principle here of that sense. So in dangerous cases, demands that there must not given too much conceits, not to bring. In other words, dangers we should be cautious about this and restrain them, and things that are beneficial we give any latitude. So repeat this. It is above all in these dangerous cases that demands must not be conceded except insofar as they cannot be denied by the full rigor of law, and that it is also from this obligation that the prince derives a great advantage for preserving his power in spite of the people, without being possible to say that he has asserted, like I said before. For a while, apparently only using his rights, it is very easy for him to extend them, and under the pretext of public peace to prevent the holding of assemblies destined to reestablish good order. In other words, he can abuse it. In other words, the power to preserve can also be the power to abuse. And that's the danger here. And there's no clear way to know this. This is the danger here. And therefore, there must be kind of watchful care on this, right? So don't have extensive, regulate it. Dangerous thing, regulate. You give freedom to those things that are beneficial, right? So this is what he means here. So that he takes the advantages of a silence. So that he takes advantage of a silence when he keeps from being broken, or of irregularities he himself has committed, to assume that the attitudes of those who are silenced by fear are in his favor, and to punish those who dare talk. Again, this is some bad habits. In other words, this is some of the bad things that they can do. In other words, that he keeps silent. In other words, he takes advantage of silence, which he keeps from being broken, or irregularities he himself has committed, to assume that the attitudes of those who are silenced is by fear are in his favor. Because of fear are in his favor. As people silence, because of fear, they're silent because of fear, and therefore and they punish the people who do speak up, and they punish those who dare to talk. In this way, the Decembrists, at first elected for 1 year and then continued for another, tried to retain their power in perpetuity by no longer allowing the people to assemble. It is by this simple means that all governments of the world, once they are invested with public force, sooner or later usurp the sovereign authority. That's the danger. that once they have the public force, they have public force invested. It was governments of the world, all of them. This is the problem. Governments will tend to be this. They have sooner or later they will usurp the sovereign authority. This is a tendency. This is a because all people are wicked in that sense, and all power corrupts. And this is all power tends to corrupt. Absolute power corrupts absolutely by Lord Acton, right? This is a very interesting position here in that sense of the corruption. And he gives the example this December is extending their power to perpetual, right? And this is, and it is this, I repeat, and it is by this simple means that all governments of the world, once they're invested with public, sure. The periodic assemblies I spoke of earlier are suited to prevent or postpone this misfortune. So that's why you meet the assemblies of the people regularly. Above all, when they do not need formal convocation. For when the prince could not prevent them without openly declaring himself a violator of the law as an enemy of the state. In other words, if you have these things like this and they don't get tired and they can do it, and if he declares, in other words, for the prince could not prevent them if they were allowed to do this regularly. If they were simply allowed to regularly happen, people can convoke them. Um, um, these assemblies, whose only object is the maintenance of social treaty, should always be opened by two propositions that can never be omitted and that are voted on separately. So these assemblies whose only object is maintenance of social treaty, the society, the body politic, should always be opened by two propositions, and they and can be never omitted, and that they are voted on separately. One, first, does it please the sovereign to preserve the present form of government? Yes or no? Does it please? Second, does it please the people to leave the administration in the hands of those who are currently responsible for it? So yes, 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 but no, no, no. Right? Those are the four possibilities. Right? Here I assume what I believe I have demonstrated, namely that the state here is no fundamental, the state, that in the state there is no fundamental law that cannot be revoked, even, not even the social compact. Sovereign can say, it's over, bye-bye, dissolve. For if all the citizens were assembled in order to break the compact by permanent agreement, there is no doubt that it would be very legitimately broken. Grotius even thinks that every person can renounce the state of which he is a member and recover his natural freedom and his goods by leaving the country. On this understanding that the reason for leaving is not to evade one's duty and avoid serving the homeland at that moment of need. In other words, on the understanding that you're doing this not because you're trying to evade your duty or to serve your country at the moment of need. In such a case, fleeing would be criminal and punishable. It would no longer be withdrawal but desertion. Right. This is the 110. See Grotius on the laws of rights and war, volume 2. On this crucial point, the conventional distinction between modern totalitarianism and constitutional regimes follows Rousseau's principle in a sense, right? So, in other words, it covers his natural freedom. Now, it would be absurd for all citizens together to be assembled to do what each of them uh, 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 can do separately. In other words, that's why he denies that Grotius one. Grotius thinks that every person can do this. Now, it would be absurd for all citizens together to do together to be unable to do what so in other words, he even grants that part, right? He's going to grant Grotius. But if every individual can do that, then the whole thing collectively can do it. So therefore, even then they could do that. And that's how he ends the third book. Well, this has been a long one. We end book 3. We turn next to book 4, which goes in more into the Roman specific functions of this. Well, book 4 looks at book 4 as the thing focuses on, again, a continuation discussion of political laws and the ways to strengthen the Constitution of the state are. So therefore, these are the ways you strengthen the Constitution of the state. It will have 9 chapters, and we'll continue. We'll have basically maybe 4 videos more. So therefore, that's it. Please put your comments and the things below, and you get to. Oh, I didn't like this, and sorry it took longer than I thought it would. I kind of got distracted. A couple notes. I went to some notes and did some more things. I checked some things out. We're at middle doing this. Well, if you have any questions, again, like I said, comments, please put below, and if I see them, I'll answer them. Like the video, like it. I know people who's. I'm wondering if this is any good because I haven't seen anyone really. Oh, there's about some videos being watched and some things that are being watched. Maybe I'm not that my voice is crackly and old, and I'm getting a little depressed about people not really being interested. But this is at least I'm doing this. I'm doing this so that if people are interested, they can read the book, see my video, and get an understanding of the text. Maybe then go read it on themselves and think about it. If they can engage with it, and then they can maybe have some engaging with them on this. Like it, share with a friend, hit the like button. Let's grow this. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Get others to subscribe. I was at 400. I kind of went underneath 400. I hope that, of course, maybe you're seeing this 3 years later after I did it. It's going to be online forever. So trees, even after I'm dead, I hope they stay on. Please check it out. Subscribe, like it. If you didn't like it, hit the okay. If you don't like it, say it, but say why in the comments, and maybe I can improve. Maybe I can learn something. Maybe someone, maybe even if you didn't like what I did, you can point out where I did wrong, and other people who watch it can judge whether you're right, and they can learn from your criticisms or negative point of your position. So this is why it's beneficial. Second of all, you can follow me in social media. Links below if you want to follow what I do, social media and things like that. I'm not always that active in Twitter. I'm more active. You can also follow my academic social media links, but what are my publications and scholarship aspects. And if you want to help me to do what if you want to help me financially to do this, because this needs money, man. It needs money and time, and I should be, okay. You can do so by becoming a member of Subscribestar and Patreon, and becoming a Patreon or a Subscribestar supporter. It's not that expensive. It's a buck. I think it's $5 at the most. For those who can do it, I'm not going to say please do it. All you can do by buying one of my books, or buying the book, or buying an art. My books, the book's name, not the links to the publishing, because it'd be unfair to always link you to Amazon, and that's not always. You might want to go to other bookstores. So I just gave you the books, and you can order one. So that's it. Again, this is Mondays and Wednesdays. Tuesdays and Thursdays are usually reserved for Schmitz, and this time, by the time of this, it's dictatorship, and we will. On Fridays is either a live stream or a messing around or a book chat. Okay, take care. Have a good day. Take care. Bye bye.